In this lesson, we are going to discuss main differences between formal and informal language in writing emails. Think about it for a second. Why do we have different writing styles for emails? When do you use formal language and when do you use informal language? Is using informal expressions in a formal email worse than the other way around? Pause the video for a second and give yourself some time to think. Having thought about the previous questions, fill out the gaps in the following text. Pause the video here. In general, formal language is reserved for any official situation, for example a business one, whose participants do not know each other on a personal level, but are in conversation because they have a common goal. For example, they are trying to negotiate a contract. Formal language is characterized by longer sentences and a more sophisticated vocabulary. Using formal language when talking to a friend may seem odd, sometimes even funny, but using informal language in a formal situation may cost you a contract or a new client, even your job. What phrases and expressions characterize informal and formal emails? Pause the video here and think about it. How would you phrase the parallel variations of the provided samples? As you can see, a formal email is phrased differently than an informal one, even though they share the same structure. In both cases, we have a subject, a beginning, an introduction, description of the issue, a summary or a conclusion or an ask, an attachment, a sign-off, and the end. However, the subject matter is expressed differently in each case. As previously stated, formal emails have longer and more complex sentences and a more sophisticated vocabulary. For example, you wouldn't start a formal email with "Hi, hello." You would start it with "Dear Sir, Madam, Mr., Mrs., or Miss." You would describe the issue with "The issue is that a problem arose due to." Also, you would say, if you attached a file, attached you will find the file which you requested. You wouldn't go simply, "Also, I attached a photo from my holiday in Spain." Another important thing is the end. You end a formal email with "Kind regards, yours faithfully" or "sincerely," whereas an informal one you end with "Regards, love, warmest wishes," etc. Furthermore, in a formal email, you wouldn't say that somebody is off. You would say that they took a leave. You wouldn't say that you back up someone. You would say that you support them. You wouldn't say that something went through. You would say that it was formally approved by someone. In a formal email, you wouldn't call something off. You would cancel it. And, of course, in a formal email, you wouldn't say that you got through to someone. You would say that you made contact with someone. What are the main distinctions between a formal and informal style? Should one use contractions such as won't, can't, don't, etc. in formal correspondence? The answer to this question is no, one shouldn't. In formal correspondence, you should use full forms such as will not, cannot, do not, should not, etc. In a formal email, may one use shortened versions of words, for example, info for information or ad for advertisement? The answer to this question is no, one shouldn't. In formal correspondence, you should stick to full versions of words, so information instead of info and advertisement for ad. However, in an informal email, you can use shortened versions of words. Should one use phrasal verbs in formal correspondence? In formal correspondence, one shouldn't use phrasal verbs. In such correspondence, you should stick to using full versions of verbs. However, there is an exception to this rule. Americans welcome phrasal verbs even in formal correspondence a lot more than Englishmen. So keep that in mind. How should one use modal verbs in a formal email? In a formal email, instead of saying can you or will you, you should phrase it could you or would you. It's more polite and more formal. Another exercise. Compare the pairs of emails on the following slides. Which one do you think is formal and which one is informal? Why? Pause the video and give yourself some time to think. As you can see, the first email employs longer sentences and doesn't contain phrasal verbs. So it is clearly obvious that it is a formal one. Whereas the second one is informal. It starts with Hi John, whereas the previous one starts with Dear Sir or Madam. In this case, you can guess just from the very beginning of the email which one is formal and which one is informal. The first one starts with hello, whereas the second one starts with Dear Jim. Although in the second one we address the person with their first name, it's still a formal email because we start with dear, and take a look at how we end it. Kind regards, Sally Jones, customer care. Also, the sentences are longer and we have a more complex structure here. We have a similar situation on this slide. The first email starts with hello Jack, whereas the second one starts with dear Mr. Smith. Also, the sentences in the second email are longer and more complex. Furthermore, we have a sign-off, I look forward to your reply, whereas the previous email doesn't have one. On this slide, the first email is a formal one, which, as in the previous cases, we can guess from the very beginning. Dear Mr. Ferrara. Also, as previously stated, sentences are longer, more complex, and don't contain any phrasal verbs. And here's a little clip on how to handle a stressful situation with a properly written email. Thank you for your attention. I hope you enjoyed this lesson.